Leaving Los Angeles not only gave Costello simple vibes of a random day on his bike, but it strangely bifurcated the enormity of the tour in comparison to the many rides he'd taken as an avid cyclist. After the analysis and preparation for this tour, he was truly immersed in the choice he made to give his life the purpose he felt it had been missing. Costello wasn't fooling himself. He knew this was something so many creators, activists, thrill seekers, etc. experience every single day. He just didn't realize how much the punch in the gut would hurt once it sunk in he was now pushing rubber to the pavement on his way to the other side of the country. As the realization began to settle in, his strides got stronger and stronger. He found himself halfway to the high desert of Southern California before he was able to start processing any thoughts outside of cycling while pedaling with skittish fervor. It was a battle with himself to find the comfort he always has on his bike. The overarching goal kept looming. His idea grew as a daunting chore with each mile he passed. It wasn't until around the 60th mile marker when he realized he would either achieve his goal or he would have to settle for the dark cloud of only making the effort. He knows those who loved and supported him would stand with him proudly no matter how far he made it on this tour. The fear was personal. This was when the pedaling started to feel like a medium for art. He could visualize the outcome, even as he blacked out occasionally. His soul was creating the image that only he could hand the world, and without him, the world would never see this masterpiece. He understood his job now, just as he began to structure his mind, all while his body was towing him across parts of the nation he'd been a citizen to for nearly 4 decades. The sweltering and overpopulated cities of the high desert pulled up on him. He realized his first leg was complete. Time to find a decent place to sleep and slide through as quick as possible so he could work his way into Calico. He felt like he'd cleared his first rough hurdle, truly understanding what he was doing and taking control of everything for what it was. He could only hope that a good night's rest wouldn't fuck up his cerebral rhythm. He couldn't have been more wrong. The moment his head hit the pillow, his mind went to work. He's back on his soapbox. In Costello fashion, he's engaged in a discussion with himself about how people are far more motivated by someone who doesn't do things for them, rather they do hurtful things to others to bring them joy. It became a classic grift in America, and so many who felt forgotten or screwed by the system loved when a charlatan would spend their days attacking these folks' opponents, just to win them over. This wasn't the first time Costello had this internal discussion. It was, however, the first time he couldn't make it stop when he needed to get to sleep and be on the road with a full night's rest behind him. It was as though getting this tour started jostled something deep down, reminding him he was risking so much. A piece of him wanted to be proud for being a decent person in a world full of selfish and misguided nuisances. The counter-argument always leaned into him not wanting to feel narcissistic. Tonight may have been one of the first nights he's ready to put the narcissism aside and realize, even under the assumption he may have murdered 2 people, he truly wasn't just a decent person, but someone he could be proud to let others see. He wanted to scream from the mountaintops that targeting half the population in America with false boogeyman accusations to win over the other half never sat well with him. He'd watched so many people master this tactic for years, and he felt like his only response could be to go higher than them. It clicked suddenly. He found some peace and felt his body transcending into rest. He and Avery packed this tour with everything he could think of to prove that even though it was a lifelong dream to conquer this quest, it would be filled with nuggets of altruism. His gifts to anyone who cares about or observes the tour would consist of a focused agenda and goals, and not just showing off these goals for the sake of making others look like shit. His trek to Calico became a story yet to be told. He felt inspired by others who'd also made sacrifices to see that someone else would either benefit from the work or become motivated to plan their own challenge and inspire others. He saw the vacuum and felt all the ideas and wit bouncing around inside of his head ready to fill that void. He got a chuckle thinking about the stifling, dusty wasteland he would be charging into and wondering how it would become a beacon for inspiration. It brought a bit of joy to Costello. He suddenly couldn't wait to see what Calico had in store for him. He knew what it had for him on the surface, but the stories that may resonate would hopefully be as good as forecasted, and the rest would just follow suit. He was asleep within minutes after coming to this conclusion. He didn't wake up until he heard that ominous tone coming from his cell phone, and then moments later, a wake-up call from the front desk. He showered and dressed after putting in an order for room service. He assumed he may be sleeping roadside quite a bit, so this was a treat to get things started with amenities. The road to Calico was on the historic Route 66 and would be one of his shortest legs, hopefully. Costello made sure his second day of cycling wouldn't be as daunting. After the first day from Los Angeles into the new scenery of the high desert, he figured he could allow himself to get the mind processing after a grueling day one. He was right on point with that plan. The night spent in Adelanto put his brain in a blender. Waking up to a shorter leg and a quarter-gram of mushrooms on his second day was as though someone plugged him in and recharged the entire operating system. Around his second hour of pedaling, he realized he hadn't spoken with Avery since yesterday afternoon. The openness of the desert was captivating. He could nearly visualize the sunlight being washed away as the heat sucked up into the night sky. Every mile he saw somewhere enticing him to pull over and set up camp so he could become bewildered by the blanket of stars that would soon cover the landscape. He had to keep reminding himself he was hours from having the opportunity to enjoy the beauty, and he had to focus on pedaling and breathing. He didn't want to make any of it seem like a job, but the reality settled in sadly during day two. He was already coming to terms with this brutal reality of what he started and needed to start working on inspiring himself to keep the body working. Turned out now was a great time to call Avery and find out how her voice and spirit could uplift him. Avery picked up the phone like she'd been sitting staring at it all day. She read him the riot act for not calling when he landed in Adelanto. They were sharing location, so she knew he made it. She also assumed she'd at least get a phone call. Costello obviously wasn't thinking clearly, but he had his medication on board, and now he's recognizing the error of his ways. He jumped into a bit of a boilerplated apology. And suddenly, he started to feel this energy course down his body into his legs as he listened to her voice. The intensity from his hips into his quads and hamstrings was dynamic. Everything rushed down to his calves, and his feet seemingly spun the cranks with ease. A moment ago, he couldn't stop seeking a resting spot, and now he wants to keep pedaling forever. He did everything to stay chatty with her, and then he let it slip that he was experiencing this emotion. She knew she had to remind him that he was way too early in the tour, and he would have to find ways to manifest that same emotion when it's just him and the road. She hated being so blunt with him, but he was riding an immense high. Avery recognized it and had to ensure he'd be prepared for the flip side of the mania. After a 10-minute conversation and ensuring Avery he was well aware he would need to motivate the lows of the tour on his own, he finally mustered up the courage to say goodbye. He asked if he could FaceTime her when he sets up camp in a few hours. She began to remind him he didn't need to ask to speak with her, ever. At that moment, the call started to break up. Avery just said 12 words before hanging up. "I'm just going to hang up, and we'll say goodnight later on." The phone went dead, and Costello heard his tires roaring across the pavement of Route 66.